Welcome to my latest video series on leading in uncertainty. It's a sort of FAQ where I try to answer typical questions being asked of me at the moment. This second episode looks at the common leadership mistakes that I'm seeing being made at the moment. Take a moment to check out how well you're tracking. I think the first one that I want to talk about is how some leaders are looking in, not out. So what do I mean by that? Well, of course, we know that in the initial stages, we were all bunkering down. We all retreated to our home offices. People had to reinvent, refigure how they were going to actually work. And there was very much a focus on making sure our teams were okay and making sure there was some degree of activity continuing to happen in the new situation. But we should have passed this by now. And if you're still in a bunkering down, focusing on your own teams and your own issues, it's probably not a good place to be, because what that actually does, of course, is reinforces the old silo mentality. Because if we're going to innovate and look at opportunities in the adversity, which is what I spoke about in episode 1, then we really need to be doing a lot of scanning of the horizon and looking at what's actually happening. What's happening with our communities, what's happening with our customers, what's happening with our other stakeholders. What is it that they now want of us, and how do we need to reinvent with that in mind? So again, having a look this week perhaps at how much time you actually spent focusing on your own team and your own department and your own problems, and how much time you spent looking out and doing that scanning, that it's almost like an external radar of finding out what's actually going on with your stakeholders that you're going to need to be able to respond to if you're actually going to be able to stay relevant. So are you bunkering down, or are you starting now to look out and working across departments and across areas so you're not stuck in that silo mentality, if you like? The next common mistake that I think I'm seeing is it's quite easy to get into inertia when there's lots of unknowns and you really don't know what the future is, and it seems that things are changing day by day. You can quite easily say, well, I can't actually plan anything because I actually don't know what the future is going to be. And what we need to be doing, as I spoke about in episode 1, is to get involved in what we call emergent planning. So looking at what the best plan and the possible scenarios are now, and being really clear on our purpose, which I'm going to be speaking about in another episode as well. So have a think about that. Do you think that you are being a little bit more prone to using the uncertainty as an excuse? Or are you out there trying to be a little bit proactive in terms of what might be the possibilities of what is going to be next? And of course, closely related to this is the extent to which we're focusing on problems, not possibilities. So in your conversations with staff, for example, do you tend to still get focused on how you're going to manage the problems and the realities right now? Or are you also allowing some time for talking about possibilities and solutions? And this again, as I've mentioned previously, is a really important part of seeing opportunity and adversity. So the way in which you talk about the current situation and the amount of time you're focusing on now rather than the future is a really good example of whether or not you're actually not looking for opportunity at the moment, and you are stuck not only in that inertia, but the conversations that you're having tend to be more around the current problems and current restrictions, if you like. The other theme I'm actually seeing is that we know that in the worst of times, we see the best behaviours and we also see the greatest growth. I know that when I've worked with people who've been going through some quite difficult work situations, you know, perhaps, for example, a really difficult boss or team or board. And I always like to think that the very most challenging, if you like, the very difficult scenarios that we actually encounter always are the best for growth and learning. Of course, we don't notice that when we're in it because it's quite difficult and even traumatic, but when you look back on them, and perhaps you could do that right now, look back on some of the things that have been the most difficult in your working life, I think you'll probably find that in retrospect, they were also the areas where you grew most. And so no matter what's going on at the moment, you still have people that are working with you, and you still have a collective group of people. And so what does that actually mean? Well, there is an enormous amount of learning and growth that we can actually be doing at an individual level and at a team level, and of course at an organizational level. And so capturing some of those learnings through reflection is something that's really, really valuable to do at the moment. Is what have we learned about each other? What have we learned about what we can actually do together as a team? What have we learned about what this organization is good at and not so good at? And of course, it's those strengths that actually are going to take us forward, because if we're reinventing what we're going to do, we need to be really clear on where our strengths are. What is it that we can do really well? What aren't we doing as well? And what might we just be able to let go of, if you like, in terms of reinventing ourselves to be strong and relevant and to thrive beyond the current situation. So once again, having a think about in your daily interactions with your staff, either individually or collectively, how much are you engaged in conversations around reflecting on the growth that people are having and the goals that they actually might set for continued growth in that situation? So even if things are really not going well at all at the moment for you, there's so much that we can actually learn about how we personally are managing through adversity and how we actually do that together. Because all of these learnings, of course, if we take them forward into our new reality, then they're actually going to be brilliant, not just for ourselves and for our leadership and for our teams, but also in terms of our organizations. So it's that growth mindset, if you like, continuing to have that in all sorts of ways. It's really, really useful, I think, at the moment. So in my next episode, I'm going to expand a little bit around how do we actually provide a really clear purpose and vision in uncertainty. And I'm going to unpack a little bit more around what that actually might look like. So in the meantime, have a reflection on how well are you looking out rather than being focused in? To what extent are you guilty of being stuck in inertia, and how proactive do you think you are? If you were to look at a percentage time spent in each, what might it be? How much are you focused on problems versus opportunities? And what sort of conversations have you actually been having with your staff individually and together as a team around what they've been learning about themselves and their growth that can actually be taken forward to whatever it is you're going to be recreating? And in the next episode, I'm going to be focusing, as I said, on how we actually create a purpose in uncertainty. And until then, go well and stay resilient.